Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel. Today I'd like to talk to you about gender envy, what it is, and how it may actually interact potentially with somebody who already experiences with gender dysphoria, and what potentially gender envy can tell you about your gender identity. This is something that I have a lot of people ask me. I have had individual clients that express experiencing and feeling gender envy, and also seen a lot of people commenting on a lot of my videos asking me about this topic. So without further ado, let's dive in. So what is gender envy? For starters, I think it's really important to distinguish between envy and between jealousy. Jealousy is more of almost a judgmental attitude, almost feeling some kind of rivalship or spitefulness towards something that you see somebody else having, whereas gender envy is more feeling a longing or desire for certain advantages that you see somebody else have. Envy has more to do with a desire for something versus necessarily feeling content or resentment toward the person who's having it. So I think it's important to distinguish that from the get-go. In my experience as a psychologist, I've been taught that we often tend to idealize desire things in other people because they are a reflection of the things we want in ourselves, or because they're a reflection of things we ourselves capable of and also desire. The same way when we devalue another human being, that's an indication of the qualities we devalue in ourselves that we need to work through. So when I hear individuals having gender envy, which essentially means desiring a gender identity, a gender presentation, an overall, I guess, gender, almost want to say package, but we're not really packaging gender identity here, are we? Because it's such a subjective sense of self. But desiring a particular gender identity that you see in somebody else, and you envying it because you are seeing it as an advantage that somebody has, and you want it because you deeply identify with it. That could be one of the reasons why you may be experiencing gender envy, because there's a part of you that resonates. And for a lot of you who are watching this, who know that you are experiencing gender dysphoria, you know that you're transgender without a doubt, or at least with some uncertainty in mind. 100% doubt, as we know, is not something that's very common. You most likely have experienced gender envy when you came across an individual out there in public, maybe in a group of your friends or in a group of your acquaintances, that represented a gender that you yourself striving to be, or that you haven't taken steps to be, but identify with internally, authentically. Envy is something you may have experienced already. So one of the reasons that, like I said, that individual can experience gender envy is because it is something that you identify in yourself, right? So it is something that you see in the other that you also see internally within yourself, sometimes even without an awareness. Now, here's the tricky part. Some people have asked me, if I experience gender envy, does it mean that I'm transgender? And that is way too simplistic, in my opinion, to link gender envy to immediately feeling like you are transgender. I say this: if you're experiencing an envy about somebody's gender identity and you yourself still not sure about your gender identity, then more exploration is needed. Because a lot of times what we idealize, in this case, envy in somebody else, may not be literal on the surface, right? For example, let's say you have a neighbor that drives an expensive car and you envy, you idealize the fact that they have an expensive car. It may not be literal that you yourself want an expensive car, but it could be a subtext for a deeper meaning. And only by sitting and exploring it can you understand what the subtext is. The subtext could be that you envy the fact that they have financial freedom to be able to afford an expensive car. Perhaps you envy their relationship to money, that they're able to spend money on something that they themselves want. So we have to be careful here when you idealize something in somebody else, not to quickly jump that could be an indication that you are transgender. Like I said, for those of you who know you are transgender and are deeply connected to your authentic self and experiencing gender envy, chances are that's exactly why you're experiencing it. You're experiencing it because you're seeing in another person the gender identity in reality that you aspire to be. But for those of you who are still not sure about your gender identity, maybe you're questioning, maybe you're just starting to experience gender dysphoria, maybe you're wondering what the heck is going on, experiencing gender envy doesn't necessarily immediately leads or links to an individual having transgender identity. More exploration is needed. So I really encourage for people who are not sure and experience these feelings to explore it. It could be that what you envy is telling you about envy of somebody else's gender is that perhaps the subtext is that you envy how free this person is. Perhaps you envy how this person is able to authentically embody themselves. Perhaps you envy something else, the way they show up in this world. But you have to do a little bit digging work here. Gender envy for transgender individuals who know they're trans is a real phenomenon, and it can be very, very difficult phenomenon to go through, especially in the beginning of your transition. If those of you who decided to go through gender transition, in the beginning, gender envy can hit, and it can be very uncomfortable and it can also increase your dysphoria very much so. The reason why it does that, why you experience all of these uncomfortable things when you experience gender envy in the beginning of your gender transition, is because it almost, it's like a teaser. It's like you're hungry and somebody's dangling a carrot in front of your nose, right? That's the feeling. You're seeing something in somebody else that you're so strongly identify with, and you're trying to take steps to get there. And in the beginning, it can be very slow. The progress can be minimal. You may not see the results immediately. It can be incredibly frustrating to see somebody embodying the genders that you identify with, especially if that somebody is another transgender person that had what you yourself on the outskirts consider a successful transition, or the way you wish your transition will also turn out. Can be very difficult, and envy can be very real thing and incredibly uncomfortable. And as a result, it increases your dysphoria because, again, you're seeing everything you want that you haven't yet gotten to yourself. And therefore, it creates a gap. It creates a gap where you're at right now and a gap where you're trying to go. And it makes you that much more aware of how big the gap is. And the bigness of the gap can bring up all sort of feelings. I'm not doing enough. I will never get there. All feelings of doubt and insecurity and fear. It will never work out for me. This is what gender envy can do for individuals. This is why it can be so devastating and increase the dysphoria as well. Some people experience gender envy and they use it to their advantage. Instead of feeling the disconnect and sitting in that gap, what people are doing is they realize that, hey, I'm idealizing here something that I want. So I'm going to pay attention to what is it that I want exactly? How do I see this person showing up over here? And how can I also start doing the same thing in my life, even if it's little steps? What can I learn from envying this over here? How can I figure out a plan to get myself over here? So it depends how you're going to use it. One of the things that I want to tell you about gender envy that I find can be very detrimental to your gender transition if you're going through gender transition of any shape or form, social transition or medical or surgical transition, is to be careful not to use the person that you idealize, the person towards which you feel gender envy, not to use that as an ideal to aspire to. Because when you use somebody else as an ideal to aspire to, you're really setting yourself short because you're not considering yourself, you're not considering your history, you're not considering the whole context you're situated in. You're not considering where you live, you're not considering your access to resources, you're not considering your circumstances, you're not considering your age. There's so many things to consider. So when we are put on a pedestal, if you will, that we envy, and then we create it as an ideal, it can be, in my opinion, quite detrimental to your path, because then anytime you feel like you don't meet up in your authentic path with that ideal, you don't match up, it can be very, very disappointing. It can spiral people into depression. It can spiral people into low self-esteem, low self-worth, self-loathing, you name it. For that reason, I highly recommend, if you are experiencing gender envy toward another person, because you're idealizing the way they show up in the world in regard to their gender, because you see yourself in them, or because you see your authentic self in them, what I highly recommend is, instead of making that your ideal, it's great to have aspirations, but then situate those aspiration within your own context and be realistic in regards to your situation. But of course, having aspirations is a wonderful thing. There's people who are content creators, there's people who are educators, there's people who do a lot of things for other people that I aspire to, but I make sure that I'm careful not to situate them as an ideal to become. The ideal to become is me in that context, and the ideal to become for you is you in that context. So that would be my little recommendation here in terms of being careful not to put people on pedestal, not to remember, idealization is telling you that there's something in you that you can actualize. So there's something in you that you're capable of in regards to that which you idealize. And again, for those of you who are not sure about your gender identity and you're exploring things and you're in the baby stages and you're experiencing gender envy, realize that it can not always necessarily has to be literal. It doesn't necessarily mean that you envy somebody because that's the gender you ought to be. It could be a lot of things why you envy them, and that's where the self-exploration comes in. Comment below, let me know if you have experienced gender envy. I know that a lot of people have. You may have not used the word gender envy, you may have not known how to exactly call it, how to exactly name it, but it is very common. And I think it's impossible not to experience because we're human beings. And when we see somebody else navigating life in a way that we ourselves strive to navigate our life, envy, I think, in many ways is inevitable and it is a natural byproduct of recognizing ourselves in those individuals. So comment below, let me know. I love reading all of your comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.